Welcome to the lunchtime series of webinars from the Ireland Chapter of the PMI. We are here today with introducing design thinking methods in project management. So those of you who registered with us will know that we have today with us Denis Vukosav. Hi Denis, welcome.
Hi.
So this is Katrina speaking as usual, and today we will have Denis speaking to us on the topic of design thinking. Some of you may already be familiar with Denis as he has presented at various PMI events, particularly across Europe. So today he's going to workshop the techniques and methods behind design thinking. Hopefully the intention here is to demystify us. So he's going to show us some of the conventional problem solving practices and how design thinking can help shake those up a little bit. He's got a very full slide set for you today to go through a lot of different ideas. And he's also going to engage you with Menti. So as usual, hopefully you'll see in front of you now, if you want to grab your phone, go to menti.com and use the code in front of you there, 451968. Denis has a number of questions throughout the presentation to engage your feedback and your input as he goes along. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Denis because we have a packed session today. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Denis, and thank you for joining us today, and we're all looking forward to this presentation.
Thank you for the nice introduction, Katrina. Hello everyone, and welcome to the webinar introducing design thinking methods in project management, organized by Ireland Chapter of PMI. I hope you're all doing well in these strange times. My name is Denis Vukosav. I live in Dublin and work at State Street as a Vice President of Technology and Global Program Manager. And for those of you who know me, they know that I'm a big advocate of introducing creativity and innovation in project management. Today, I'll be speaking about design thinking, its application in project management, but also about its flaws and side effects. So everything is not pink. The webinar will be recorded, so if for some reason you need to leave us before the end, and a copy of the recording together with presentation will be available. During the session, as Katrina mentioned, there will be some few simple questions, and your feedback will be appreciated. At the end of the webinar, I hope that there should be some time for your questions, but of course, if there will be some more questions, I will follow up on those after the webinar. So let's start. What is design thinking? Albert Einstein is often quoted as saying, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and then 5 minutes thinking about solutions. The idea of thinking carefully about the problem before actually jumping to solution is one of the key features of design thinking. To use design thinking means to somehow identify a problem space which defines the scope and nature of possible solutions. Because I would say true creativity lies in reframing rather than just brainstorming of ideas. However, design thinking is not a new methodology. This is not a new framework or the process you need to strictly follow. It's not some kind of linear exercise in which one step follows another. Instead, design thinking teams need to go back and forth in an iterative process from analysis to concept, and then back to analysis and data collection, and then back to prototype refinement. Design thinking is actually how you work. So this is your mindset. These are the methods you use. These are the culture of your team and your organization that you are part of. Its application in business is, I would say, often way oversimplified. It's more than just the post-its, which is some kind of symbol of design thinking, that are covering the wall or red couch or creative brainstorming. Much more is required than a 5-step of so-called process I'm going to show you a bit later to come up with some kind of innovative idea, innovative project. Introduction of design thinking needs to go together with some additional changes in leadership and organizational capabilities. And these changes include senior management commitment, understanding of design thinking approach, financial support, and dedicated space and time. So it's not easy. Otherwise, it won't be able to, I would say, diffuse across the organization, or its introduction may even lead to some kind of unintended consequences. We are going to discuss that a bit later. Reasons for the success and failure of design thinking are often, I would say, closely linked with how the people who use it understand the concept itself. There are several goals for today's webinar, as I briefly mentioned earlier. So the first one is to describe benefits of introducing design thinking approach into your organization, then identify ways how design thinking can be applied in project management, and then how to recognize and avoid design thinking side effects, or as I call them, disappointments. I like this picture. Though we glorify innovation, and this quote, of course, the truth is that majority of people actually want everything to be as stable and as familiar as possible. In any industry, customers tend to resist innovation. Our clients don't always know what they want. So it's our task, our job, to figure out what they need, or even to create that need. However, if we are fully customer-centric, that kind of approach to innovation usually lead only to incremental improvements. So if we are looking for radical innovation, we have to be brave, we have to be bold, and we have to build on top of what we hear from our users, our customers. Let me give you one example about customers. Let's think about two customers. Both are male, born in 1948, raised in England, married twice, successful, wealthy. Both of them have at least 2 children. They like dogs and love the Alps. So based on this description, I would say they are very similar, right? But maybe you didn't realize one of them could be Prince Charles and the other one Ozzy Osbourne. So they're not so similar customers, right? Why I'm mentioning this example? Because those statistical user descriptions are important. A true understanding of habits, culture, social context, and motivation of our customers are crucial. Users need to be put at the center of the process. And this requires a full understanding of users beyond just statistical descriptions and empirical analysis of their needs. So that gaining authentic user insights includes the application of approach that enables us to slip into the customer's shoes and understand their individual experiences and its wider context. Because we are all customers, we are all users, though we have different needs and different mindsets. And exactly that, the understanding of this different mindset, is where design thinking begins. I'll give you 2 examples of successful innovation projects, two very known products that were created using design thinking approach. Probably some of you remember Nintendo Wii video game system. So 15 years ago, when this game system was introduced, we rescued Nintendo, the Japanese company, from a deep crisis. What is interesting and not so known is that its success was due to a combination of technologies that existed for years. So there was nothing really new in Wii. But all those existing technologies combined resulted in more than 1 million units sold in 10 years. And it was loved by all generations, as you can see, not only kids. The other great example are Swatch watches. So when watchmakers from Switzerland faced Japanese digital watches invasion. I'm sure you remember that. They did fantastic counterattack. So they halved the number of working parts in their watches. They introduced a quartz-powered analog watch, and that watch was priced far below anything previously sold in Switzerland. You know, the Swiss watches are usually very expensive. So what was the result? The result was design and fashion craze, as I'm sure you remember those days. Everyone were talking about Swatch watches. So why I mention Swatch and Nintendo? Because everything we do, every innovation project starts with an idea, and that idea has to be good if we want to be successful. Of course, the question is how to spot a good idea, how to spot potential successful innovation project. And the answer, though it may sound simple, actually it's not, but the idea is to introduce 3 criteria that should let us know if your idea has what it takes to result with successful innovation project. So these are customer desirability, technical feasibility, and business viability slash profitability. In the middle, so where those 3 criteria overlaps, lies a tiny space for innovation. Obviously, not all ideas are good ideas, and I'm sure all of us know that. And yes, 90% of all startups fail because they deliver projects nobody wants. And also 70% of IT projects fail too for the same reason. So using Agile and other project methodologies, we already interact with our users, with our customers. We deliver incrementally. We are making sure that our users are happy. Yet by introduction of design thinking and combining that with existing project management methodologies should drastically reduce the risk of failing with our projects. Then what's the difference between design thinking and project management methodologies, Agile, Lean Startup, Design Sprint, and how to combine them? In short, interaction of Agile, Lean, Design Sprint, and Design Thinking can be described like this. I really like this diagram. It's really nicely shown. So empathize, define, and ideate through design thinking. Then turn your ideas into business models following the lean startup, and then build and deliver the product incrementally and faster through Agile processes. You will hear during this presentation, I will mainly mention Agile because I'm a big advocate of Agile delivery, but you can also use design thinking with other project methodologies. I mean, mainly waterfall. There are different views on the place where one approach flows into the other, as you can see on this diagram, because there is too much overlap and too many similar techniques. So I would say it's better to look at design thinking, Lean, Design Sprint, and Agile as a kind of combination of tools and techniques, rather than argue for one over the other, because they all add value. Innovation initiatives can range from exploring an abstract problem space to experimenting with a number of solutions before continuously improving a very specific solution in a given market space. Let's talk more now about how to apply, or better to say, how to introduce design thinking in your organization and how to combine it with Agile and other project methodologies. I would say that design thinking is about what should be built or not built. And Agile delivery is more about how can we deliver value quickly. These interests are aligned, but they are not exactly the same. Some design thinking initiatives were initially tasked with building a certain project, and then after understanding the user need, they moved in direction of a very different type of project. On the other side, Agile delivery expects that you already decided the what, and now you are trying to break up the how into minimal specific pieces of work. I always picture that as a design thinking wedge that narrows and overlaps with an agile wedge that expands as the project focus transitions from what to how. Design thinking emphasizes that you're building throwaway work to understand the problem better. In Agile is different. So intent is to build minimally so as not to have to throw away any work or minimally work. Design thinking and Agile are complementary, and design thinking is generally more appropriate earlier in the process when that solution space is still wide open. At that point, it's still too early for Agile because we don't like to be tied to any concept yet, even if we are talking about hypothetical one. Then, once that wide range of possible solutions have been generated and down selected, and there is a general agreement on a direction for a concept, then it's great for Agile to kick in. So I would say that design thinking and Agile pair very well together as they build off iterative nature, let's call it that way, of one another. And in my view, and based on my experience, design thinking really helps driving and fostering that creative and let's call it playful mentality that frees participants from judgment or fear of failure, because we always have that fear of failure somewhere. It's also an iterative methodology based on prototyping, which falls into Agile methods perfectly. Design thinking and Agile or other project methodologies should be combined using the 3 core elements of design thinking that should result in, let's call it, creative journey. So the first one is multidisciplinary teams. Then the second is variable space, and let's call it so-called design thinking process. To solve complex problems, the expertise of a single person and the know-how of a single discipline are no longer sufficient. I'm sure all of us can agree on that. This is why we focus on team effectiveness instead of individual capabilities. The ideal design thinking team draws on its members' differences in terms of age, nationality, education, profession, and cultural background. This diversity allows our teams to tap into many different areas of expertise, methods, and models. And such multidisciplinary teams often produce very unusual results and very innovative solutions, exactly because of that diversity. Developers, managers, designers, customers can often misunderstand each other simply because we all have, as we said, individual backgrounds, individual experiences, knowledge. So the ability to make use of this knowledge during project development is crucial for its later success. The second important part is the variable space. This kind of design thinking, creative work, calls for a special kind of environment, let's call it that way, that somehow lends itself to the process. So generally, the workspace in which we are doing design thinking should support the group's creativity, openness, communication. It's awesome, of course, to work in a modern light room with fancy sofas, though now because of the virus thing, everything is changing, I would say. But however, the crucial point is something else. The space should primarily be changeable and flexible. So during the various stages of design thinking, it has to quickly adapt to the team needs. For example, working while standing or sitting, working in a team or alone, working silently, loudly. So it should be easy to move office furniture around, such as tables and chairs. So in that way, creating a new setups, new scenarios. So that is the reason why variable space is so important. And then finally, so-called design thinking process, though I like to avoid that process combined with design thinking, but it's usually presented as 9 stages split into 3 groups: inspiration, ideation, and implementation. Introduction of agile or some other project management methodology should happen after 6th stage. So today we're going to focus on the first 6 stages of this so-called process, as I said. So these are understand, observe to discover the problem and gain new knowledge, point of view, ideate, prototype, and finally test. As you can see, it's perfectly normal to ask almost 400 time questions why when you are 4-year-old. I'm sure all of us who had or have 4-year-olds or that age know how painful sometimes can be to answer so many times question why. But in order to resolve an issue, first we need to understand the problem. So we have to ask question why to reduce the risk of solving the wrong problem. And unfortunately, this is exactly what we usually don't do. We usually rush and try to solve problems before we actually understand them. I'm sure all of us had at least few of similar experiences in their not only professional but also personal life. So this process is best illustrated with another example. Assuming company's employees complain about boring and long weekly all hands meetings. So design thinking team is asked to solve the problem. So the team first looks at the problem from all different angles. So how can we understand the problem? What we actually already know about it? Who is affected by that problem? So the result is a common understanding which shows other aspects of the existing situation. And then design thinking team realized that meetings are not always the same and they pose different challenges. Additionally, they identified that there are various user groups who then become the focus in the next stage of design thinking. And this stage is all about users and their needs. So this is what the design thinking team is going to research and I would say dive deep into. So in this particular example, they're present at a couple of meetings and they quietly observe what's happening from the sidelines. So they are not interacting in any way, they just looking what's happening, what's the current situation looks like. So they conduct interviews with the attendees and the host of the meeting to get new insights and gain a deeper understanding of the problem and the users affected by the problem. So all that information that's very important is written down, so we are not relying on our memory, or even recorded if possible. And then in the next stage, all that acquired information is evaluated. So first, design thinking team creates an overview by writing down the insights on Post-its. And then the appraisal follows. So the Post-its are put in, let's call them clusters, and new contexts. In that way, forming patterns where once one unorganized information was. So then the design thinking team is able to recognize certain needs relating to a group of users. And in this instance, the team realized that the attendees often feel that only a few points on the agenda really matter to them, and that the remaining points of the agenda are waste of time. So the meetings from their point of view are unnecessarily time consuming. Also, the attendees complain that again and again, some crucial points do not make it into agenda, or that the agenda scheduling is poor. So as a result, the team now has a clear vision of the users, their needs, fears, goals, and then they can proceed to find a suitable solutions. So we cover those 3 stages of design thinking approach, and those 3 stages enables us to fully comprehend any complex problem. So the risk of trying to solve the wrong problem is minimized. And this is exactly what we usually forget and don't do in our organizations and in our projects. We try to solve an issue before we actually had time to understand what is the problem. In the next 3 stages, design thinking will advance, and I'll show you again for this particular example how they will solve that meeting problem. So by now, design thinking team has a, I would say, clear take on the problem, and in this stage, we are generating new ideas while still keeping the user needs in our minds. So the team creates as many new ideas as possible. Why? Because that way we are increasing a chance that one of them actually will be the good one. Only in the end, the evaluation and selection of the new ideas will take place, and only those ideas that pass the evaluation process will proceed to the next round. So we are making sure that only the best ideas are advanced. So in this particular example, that design thinking team is to develop meeting application that will allow the attendees to create meeting agenda together, no matter where they are at the moment of giving their input. So in that way, this gives everybody the opportunity to participate and propose how much time should be allocated to a particular topic. So we are no longer relying on the host of the meeting. So now the team transforms those ideas which have been selected into prototypes. So we say quick and dirty using, I don't know, paper, cloth, Legos, or anything that is at hand. So according to the saying, show, don't tell, which I would say is one of the most known quotes related to design thinking, the goal is to allow potential users to experience the idea. The more realistic the user experience of a product or service, the more valuable the feedback will be. So in this particular example, our meeting team will build an interactive app prototype from paper with movable parts. So once we have that prototype, a design thinking team will set out to find potential users to test their idea. People who will be part of that test group have the opportunity to experience planning a meeting with the help of the meeting application. So the team will ask questions, they will make observations, and they will gather insight concerning that idea. So what works well, what doesn't work well, which questions remain, how can we improve this idea? So by now, our team will have to look back. Depending on that received feedback, the team will decide if it will go back one step or more, or maybe completely abandon one prototype and proceed with testing of another. So this is the great thing, because we are not going to develop something. We are not going to waste months and months and a lot of money and time on developing something to realize that something is not working. But instead of that, we are going to be able to, in a very short amount of time, check whether our idea works or not. So by means of these 3 described further stages in design thinking approach, solutions are validated quickly and at low risk and with minimal efforts. So if the team I would say, sticks to the approach in its entirety, they will most likely develop a unique solution for a very specific user group and save, of course, as I said, a lot of time and money in the process. So how can we then summarize what are the key design thinking benefits? So I would say the most important is the ability to uncover true user insights. Also, this whole approach is, I would say, devoted to developing user empathy, which often give us information that we couldn't otherwise get from the written business requirements. I'm sure all of you had that experience. Then you get business requirement either in few sentences or in one PowerPoint or in Word document, but actually you don't feel that there is too much research done behind that. It's just a simple few sentences, but actually there is no empathy behind that. Also, design thinking principles ensure that solutions are highly relevant and compelling from the user perspective, because user was part of designing that solution. Also, we are mitigating the risk of delivering solutions that may not be applicable to user needs or become obsolete when those needs change. I'm sure all of you had that situation that when you deliver the project, you realize that actually that solution is already outdated because a year, 2 or 3 passed since you started the project. And very important thing, both internal and external stakeholders are taking part in all that explorative research activities, and they're all given a voice. So based on that voice, on their feedback, solutions can be steered in different directions much earlier. So as I said earlier, we are not waiting for the project to be completed to realize that something is wrong. We can make that change much sooner. Though innovation seems like the main reason for design thinking introduction, it's not just about innovation. So there are many ways of implementing design thinking and many reasons for organization to, I would say, embark on that journey. So those reasons could be, as I said, facilitating innovation, and especially disruptive innovation, which is very hard, but also improving user experience, fostering internal teamwork and breaking down silos. I'm sure all of you who work in the big organizations know how hard it is to break down the silos. Then also changing organizational culture, mindset, perspectives, behavior, bringing major changes in organizational and social systems, and one very interesting thing, attracting and retaining creative people. So what are the positive outcomes that are perceived as a result of design thinking introduction? I would say the main one, the biggest one I heard from many people is that organizational culture is improved. Yet additional organizational prerequisites, let's call it that way, are necessary to enable the fusion of a new culture. So while the approach itself may improve teamwork, it's not capable, honestly, of changing whole culture by itself. Organizational leaders need to understand design thinking, and they need to support changes. And then we can expect that the cultural improvements can happen. The next thing is that innovation processes are becoming more efficient. So perceived as a new approach, design thinking somehow speeds up and replaces old ways of innovation. It provides hands-on tools for continuous innovation and visibly improves the quality of solutions, making them better and more desirable from the user perspective. Also, the user integration is definitely improved. Though many organizations that start with design thinking introduction already are user-centered, their goal to become even more user-focused could not be immediately seen. Therefore, design thinking is usually more successful in organizations that already have awareness for user centricity, let's call it that way. And one very funny thing is cost reduction. Honestly, I spoke with many people around the globe, and not many people have actually the impression that design thinking saves money. Actually, some have just the opposite experience, that its introduction costs a lot. A similar impression is to be seen for design thinking ability to increase sales or profitability. However, there is a catch. The more employees acquire a new mindset, the bigger cost reduction could be observed, especially in the small details of daily operations and management innovations that, I would say, sustainably improve customer experience and business processes by applying design thinking. Leading design teams, or even a whole design-driven organization, requires different leadership styles. Applying design thinking within the traditional management model produces the paradox that it will get driven by the very circumstances it should change, if you understand what I'm trying to say. So design thinking as a concept alone, and I would say that's the kind of trap, cannot change a whole organizational culture if this is the goal of its introduction. So only if it's enabled by other innovation prerequisites, it may become the enabler and vehicle for cultural change. So the critical point here is the co-evolution, let's call it that way. So the more it becomes the very part of organizational innovation capabilities, the more the cultural environment will change, and the other way around. And this implies that the role of management also has to change. I would say there are 5 common design thinking principles that organizations want to achieve. So these are focus on user, as we already mentioned. So challenge the problem, as I already explained. Diverse viewpoints, so we have that diversity in our teams. Making it tangible, so we are making prototypes, we are letting our customers, our users to test them as soon as possible, and then experiment, so we are testing, we are making experiments. So diffusing some or all of these principles into all functions of your organization is usually the goal of design thinking introduction. And I would say storytelling is central to design thinking, because stories bring context to otherwise disconnected facts, and they somehow help to empathize with users, and they provide insight and understanding. Because of that, design thinking teams are not only creative, but they also are and should be optimistic, empathetic. They should be willing to learn from failure. They should be comfortable with ambiguity and confident, very important. So to build and to communicate that such mindset across an organization, especially a big organization, senior management needs to be very clear on what design thinking is and what it could mean to organization. And yes, as I said in the beginning, everything is not pink and bright and shine. So there are some side effects, of course. And this is especially the case if only some elements of design thinking get introduced without the intention of initiating a cultural change. Let's talk more about some of the most common threats. Let's call them threats. So that shift to experimentation and strong user focus will make a prediction of innovation efforts more challenging. And we know, especially in the big organization, that's very important to predict how much efforts we are going to use. So due to that increased ambiguity, more time will be needed for planning and measuring organizational outcomes at the beginning of its introduction. Also, leadership will increasingly get distributed to teams, which replace the standard, I would say, call them standard leadership pattern. However, this may lead to internal conflicts and might increase the cost of especially unexperienced teams at the beginning of their design thinking practice. Also, problem reframing, experimenting, and opening up to unexpected solutions empower employees to question their tasks, which I'm sure not all managers like, as well as overall strategic priorities. So that such, let's call it intellectual freedom, might not be welcome from the beginning of design thinking introduction. As we mentioned, diversity and multiple viewpoints are very important elements of design thinking. However, that might raise discussions, misunderstandings, and conflicts if not facilitated properly. So to deal with these risks and consequences, a culture of very open and constructive feedback needs to be put in place, which is can also be tricky, especially in the bigger organizations. And then finally, those unique interfaces on how to integrate design thinking into organizational processes and existing methodologies need to be created. So if this is not addressed properly, it could lead to internal conflicts, and the working surroundings might restrict teams in their work. This is something that happens very, very often in situations when design thinking teams are working somewhere away, somewhere on the remote location, not together with the bigger group. As a way to solve problems, design thinking has, I mentioned already, has some downsides for large organizations. And the reason is that it may not provide straight answers to the original question. Instead, questioning the question itself. And that requires time and resources. And outcomes are uncertain and hard to measure. So as a result, many design thinking introductions are struggling with existing organizational cultures, systems, and processes. As I said, especially in the large organizations. So I would say the question is here whether those organizations were embracing design thinking as a next big thing, because these days everybody are talking about design thinking, without really understanding it, or maybe its introduction was just too difficult for organizations, a too big change, let's say, from normal business thinking. So for the most organizations that implemented design thinking, that began as a step into the unknown. Yeah, over time, some organizations will develop internal labs, others will introduce more or less independent innovation teams, or they will try to diffuse across the organization. But unfortunately, in some cases that momentum will be steadily built over time, but in others, it will slowly disappear with changes in leadership, because as we said, very important is the role of the especially senior management who need to understand and support design thinking. So in general, I would say there are three most common reasons for failing. So the first is that design thinking was considered as a one-time thing. So probably you heard about that. We have a new big project. We heard about design thinking. That's a buzzword. Let's do it using design thinking. But there were no efforts made to diffuse it throughout the whole organization, and design thinking disappears. Then the next thing is lack of management support. As I said, we need to have sufficient resources. We need to have sufficient financial support from the senior guys who need to provide support if you want design thinking to succeed. And then, very important thing, failed implementation and diffusion. So if you are introducing design thinking in an isolated manner, design thinking will be affected and could, but probably will be affected by organizational structure and culture. I mentioned those silos that are not prepared to give it enough space to unfold its potential. So if you are introducing design thinking in your organization, you have to think about diffusing design thinking across your organization. As I mentioned, since design thinking became kind of a buzzword these days, towards the end, I would like to emphasize a few important remarks on how to avoid common disappointments that are related to design thinking. So the main thing I mentioned that few times today, but I will mention it again, design thinking is not a linear process. So there are no walkthroughs, there are no list of steps that need to be followed that will guarantee success. So if you are looking for a design thinking cookbook, you will not find it. Also, design thinking is not a 2-day workshop. I heard so many times from people, yeah, we are using design thinking. We organized that workshop and now it's perfect. We know what we need to do. So yes, we need one or more workshops to organize together different people with different backgrounds from inside or outside of the organization. But this is not the end. This is the beginning of a new approach. This is the beginning of changing mindset. This is the beginning of changing culture. So it's not enough just to organize a workshop. Also, there won't be results if not enough time is allocated to understand users. I would say that scope creep, which happens in almost all projects, every project that I worked on, and I'm sure for most of the projects you worked on, is a proof that we didn't spend enough time with our users to understand their needs before we actually started the implementation. Also, the problem needs to be reframed once team gets deep enough to see a different reality. So organizations, as we said, often rush to find solutions. Instead, we have to shift our users, our customers, from a problem-solving approach until their problems are fully comprehended. I know that's hard, probably that's the hardest part, but this is something that that shift of mindset should happen with design thinking. So no rushing with finding solutions before actually understanding the problem. Also, there won't be results if design thinking is approved only at the lower levels of the organization. So this is something that, especially in the large organizations, happens very often. So if we are building a powerful innovation company that requires organizational changes and finding ways to overcome the constraints of particular business, industry, and market. So it's not enough just to be user-focused. I'm sure you heard many times, yeah, we are user-focused. Yeah, that's nice, but that's just the beginning. And finally, I would say that many companies are sometimes satisfied with discovering the tip of the iceberg. So due to the time and money that we already spent in the discovery and ideation phase, teams can sometimes be pushed for the development, for delivery of mediocre solutions. So if we want innovative projects, that takes time, that takes deep flow, that takes dedicated team of creative people that are constantly motivating each other. Design thinking, in short, as a summary of this whole presentation, I would say brings fresh perspectives that are overlooked by other approaches. It can help develop empathy. it pushes organizations to see things from the point of view of those affected, users, customers, citizens, stakeholders. And because anyone can and should participate, design thinking can be a perfect enabler for collaboration across organizational silos. So if we are providing continued support by organizational leaders, by top managers, by the people who are running our companies, our organizations, design thinking might spread beyond its, let's call it, initial realms of application. So I always say that design thinking is and always will be both learning and unlearning journey. So at best, it should become a journey for your organization and its people that will bring some kind of positive change that will enable innovation. With this slide, I would like to recommend some of my recent design thinking articles, and also I mentioned 3 books for those of you who want to learn more about introduction of design thinking. Of course, there are many more books that can be recommended, but as I said, these books are not only for those who are new in design thinking, but also for those of you who are already working using design thinking. So I'm sure you're going to find some good ideas and thoughts inside. With this, this is actually the last slide. I'm looking at the clock, so it's 8 minutes before. That's great. So I will be happy to answer any questions you may have. Of course, you can also contact me using my email or any of these social media channels. I would like to thank you all for your attention. I hope you had a good time, and I really look forward to seeing you on some future project management or design thinking webinar or conference. Katrina, back to you.
Thanks, Denis. So I'm going to just swap screens, guys, as usual, and because we've just got a couple of minutes left. Denis, there's a good few questions. Hopefully you can see my screen there now. Let me just see. Are you able to see that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There it is. Great. Yeah, it took a minute there. Okay, so we've got a good lot we've got about 17 different comments and questions. So I think one, and they're usually quite meaty, so it's a lot to get through. The first question that actually popped up very on was, how could design thinking be introduced with waterfall? And actually, just as a matter of interest, waterfall along with agile were 2 of the most common answers selected in the previous question that you had around what methodology are you using. So waterfall is still quite popular with the project management groups.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. I mean, depending on the industry, and yes, you can use design thinking with waterfall. I would say the only major difference compared to agile is that you are not interacting so much with the customer during the delivery itself. But if you did your work properly with customer during that initiation ideation phase, if you spend some time with your customer, with your users, and give them chance to see how that future solution would look like, it's not so important that you deliver that in an agile way. I would say agile is more preferred, as I said, because you are delivering small chunks, and potentially if those needs from your users change during delivery, you can more easily change what you are delivering. But still, if you did your job properly before actually starting delivery using design thinking, it should be possible, and there will be that solution that will be much better than if you just did your project without actually spending your time with customer.
That makes sense. There's a couple of comments here as well, Denis, and I have to say I found this myself in your presentation, empathy to the user. And I think one of the comments you made earlier, and I actually wrote it down, was put the user at the center, not just the statistic. And I personally because I've never used a Nintendo Wii, but I had a Swatch, and when you use that as an example, for me it really gelled with me, because they were, up until then everyone just had watches. Like it still did the same thing. It still told the time like any other watch that
Yes.
I ever had, but they were massively
Yes.
popular when they came out with that new branding and those new designs. So it really that really kind of brought that home to me. But I really found it interesting that you said not just a statistic, like you need to be talking to the end
Exactly.
user to try and figure out what exactly is it they need. It's very good.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that I'm coming from IT, and often I'm asked from people, okay, someone who is working in IT on the other side is advocating design thinking. That is a kind of strange combination. But I spent my career, I would say, half in business, half in IT. So on one side, I fully understand we need to push our project, we need to deliver as soon as possible. But unfortunately, sometimes even one workshop with client would mean so much. If you have a chance, not only you as a business leader to talk to client, but also people who are developing, people who are usually not interacting with customers, if they have a chance to spend some time with the customer, with the user, to ask some question, to get some feedback, that would mean a lot. So that empathy, I would say, is something that we as the project managers, program managers, people who are interacting with our customers need to use more, because I think that will be something that will help us deliver better and more successful projects.
Yeah, I think if you keep that at the center of it anyway, I think you probably have more success. There is a couple of questions here that are sort of on the same theme, and they're really around, I suppose one of them is asking, they said that you do work in a bank at the beginning, do you have any experience of design thinking across different companies? Does it suit large or small companies, is one of the questions. Another question is, would it be a methodology overload on top of, PMBOK, the lean, etc.? So your personal experience, I guess, in implementing design thinking.
Yeah. So I would say working in financial services is a very challenging place if you want to introduce design thinking. But because you know that financial services are very conservative. But yes, I can say that I have not only experience in financial services. We did some very, very successful project for one of the biggest clients we have. And I would say that made really a big difference. But also I have experience in different type of industries. Yes, you can use design thinking, I would say, basically not only in any industry, but also in your personal life. But that would take much more time for me to give you examples. What I wanted to say is that size of organization, I would say design thinking is best for organizations that are not too large, but also not too small. So I would say middle organizations. It would be very challenging to introduce design thinking in a large organization. And if you're trying to do that, you should start working with project that is not too important and also not something very, very small. Because if you are trying to introduce design thinking with the most important project in your large organization, there will be a huge pressure on you, and probably you won't be able to do it properly. On the other side, if you're doing that with a very small and something that is not very significant, no one will realize that you did something differently. So if you can choose something that it's medium-sized, that it's not so important, there will be not such a big pressure on you and your team, but also not something that is no one will notice. But of course, sometimes that cannot be chosen. But I would say medium organizations have the best chance to succeed with implementation of design thinking.
Okay, and it does. There's actually, I was just scrolling through the questions and comments there, and there is a couple that are coming up on the same theme. It just obviously compliments on your presentation and on the quality of the slides, and a few people really liking the fact that you do talk about the problems and the complexities and the difficulties around trying to implement it, because I think often speaking from personal experience with Agile, people tend to come in with a very happy clappy sunshine. This is going to be amazing. It's going to transform everything. And in that fashion, it tends to lead people down the garden path a little bit. So it is good that you are calling out those challenges, and particularly the senior management buy-in. I think that's a very important one.
Yeah, I mean, I did one very big survey in which more than 100 people all around the globe participated for one of my conferences that I presented, and it was very funny that actually those things that I mentioned happen in, I would say, 80 to 90% of all organizations. So of course, not everything is bright and shiny. There are a lot of issues, there are a lot of problems, there are a lot of challenges. But I would say if you are persistent, if you are brave, if you have a chance and ability to sell that to senior management, and you manage to secure that support, I'm sure that your organization will realize the difference. And once you start with design thinking, if you do it properly, then probably it's very hard to imagine the way you delivered projects before you actually started with design thinking. So I'm a big advocate of design thinking, and as I said, I'm sure that will make a difference for your project.
So one final question, and then I'll do the wrap up as usual. It's a question from Johan from PMI France, and he's referring to our current situation with the travel ban. How can we replace the off-site workshop? Does it work remotely? And actually, it would probably be great for everyone on the call if anyone has tips.
Yeah.
How could you maybe take some of those concepts and make them work remotely? Is that something you've had to deal with?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, Katrina. We didn't prepare that, though it looked like we did. I'm preparing a new materials for the session that will talk specifically about how to use design thinking in post-COVID world. And I would say design thinking was one of the most important elements of design thinking, is bringing those people together and interacting. Of course, the things change now in this new post-COVID world, but I would say, based on my experience working from home, of course it's not the same, but there is a way how we can overcome the problem that we are not in the same room. So using technology, using the as we are doing right now, you should still invest your time to spend with your users, to spend with your customers, and do all those things that we mentioned together today. Do it. Of course, it's, as I said, it's not the same because you are not physically in the same room. You can't post it on the wall and then interact with your team, but there is a way that you can still use the same principles, I would say, of design thinking, though we are not in the same room. So as I said, I hope that I'll be able to share with you information about that new webinar I'm preparing, and I hope I'll see some of you on that new workshop or webinar. We'll see how that will look like.
Yeah, and it's definitely something to follow up on, because we've done a couple of webinars previously on remote working, as we were all sort of introduced to this in a big bang at the end of March. So it is definitely a topic that we will be following up on, and also just taking in the feedback from our own members, because they themselves have great experience and often share with us the methods and the tips and the tricks that they're using to work in the new environment as well. So we'll definitely follow up with you on that. It will be great to do a follow up on it and see what we can innovate. Perfect. Essentially. Denis, thank you so much. Denis and I have actually worked with each other previously, so I'm familiar, and I've always been familiar with how professional you are to present. So it's been great. Unfortunately, we had a little technical problem with video today, so we can't see you. So hopefully the next time we'll have the two of us on video as well. But thank you so much. And as you did say at the beginning, for everyone on the call with us, we will share the slides as we usually do. And I found, and there was a few comments as well that said the same thing, the slides are particularly informative and they are a good help. So if you want to go back and revisit the slides and get some ideas of the different stages, the inspiration, the ideation and the implementation, because I found it myself, there's a lot in this, there's a lot of food for thought in it. So I think the slides will be very helpful to revisit. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Guys, you'll, as usual, for this 1 hour webinar, you will receive one PDU, and this week it's a strategic PDU. and we will try and log your PDU for you as usual, and that typically comes through with the registration. We'll also share, as we just said, not only the slides, but the recording as well, so you can go back and go through that, and the results of the Mentipoll as well. So that's pretty much what we'll do in the next couple of days after the webinar is live. And it just leaves me to say one final thing to everybody. We have 5 more webinars planned from next week through until the end of June, and you also have the other facilities like the projectmanagement.com webinars, the ECC webinars to go to as well. We're taking a short break in July and August. We'll be back again in September. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much, Denis. It's been a very informative webinar.
Thank you, and hope to see you again soon.
Excellent, and thank you to everyone who joined us as well. So we'll wrap up and we'll see and hear each other again next week. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.